Welcome back to the channel. WINWING sent me for free the Orion 2 Viper EX with shaker and the WINWING Orion 2 Joystick CAM spring dampening extension kit to review. I will still give my truthful review, mostly comparing it with the Thrustmaster Warthog stick and the Aviation base that I conducted a review earlier, and that video is in the description. I've been using Thrustmaster products for over 10 years, so that may be interesting if you're on the fence about which brand to go with. It is perfectly fine to have a mixture of both Thrustmaster and WINWING. I hope I can shed some light on your decision. I have to say that these are my opinions based on my experiences and knowledge. Everyone has different versions of all of these, and there will be some disagreements, but this is my review. I will say this: if you're wanting a more versatile, affordable, and open button layout that can be used more easily with other aircraft other than the Viper, the WINWING Viper might be a better suit for your needs. If you're wanting a more authentic, true-to-life button layout that is not easily versatile to use on other jets, but perfectly for the Viper, and you can afford it, then Thrustmaster Viper Grip might be better suit. Let's get started with the review and the comparisons. Now let's talk about the smoothness and the movement of the controls. It's very smooth in all directions. I would personally like for it to have a more stiff spring because even with the stiffest spring it feels very loose. But after switching to the NC1S cams, it feels much better. The stiffness is just right as it should be. It is not linear and it increases resistance the more you make deflections. In regards to the Aviation, I use the stiffest springs that come with the extensions and then make adjustments to the spring tension with the screws in the base, giving it the perfect amount of tension in the side stick. Then when I want to use the center stick, I can just increase the tension without having to take off the cover for adjustments. So sometimes the base tips in full deflection. During normal use, this is not usually an issue. However, during BFM or dogfighting, it may be more apparent. As of now, I've only used the stiffest springs. I have not been able to use the other ones. When you're using the stick to full deflection, the base has a tendency to tip over. So to fix that, the base plate should be wider or heavier. Please take note that it does have suction cups, but my desk is wood, so it doesn't really work for me. To mitigate this issue, I will probably be getting a Thrustmaster base plate because the mounts are the same. For the most part, this is not a reoccurring issue for me, but it is something I notice while using the stick. So this is a feature I actually enjoy. I may not use it, but it is nice to have. It is the ability to offset the stick on the mount during install. Like I said, this ability is something I do like, especially you could do it without the need of other adapters, and the amount of angles it could be changed is more than enough for side mounts. However, I don't utilize this in particular because I have it on the desk and I'm able to offset it by rotating the entire base. But again, this is a nice feature, and it's something I would rather have and not need than need and not have. When it comes to installing the stick, I can say that Thrustmaster has the advantage on that front for sure, with only needing to place the stick on top of the base and then tightening the ring. When I was getting ready to install the WINWING, I noticed that the connector cable was already slightly kinked. So far, it doesn't have any functionality issues, but I can see it happening in the future. In comparison to Thrustmaster and WINWING, with Thrustmaster, being able to place the stick on top and tighten the ring is better than having to plug in a loose connector, tighten the ring, and tighten a screw to keep the stick from rotating and creating an offset I talked about earlier. With WINWING, I would not advise constant removal and installs to mitigate the wear of your connector, cable, and threads. Keep this in mind if you're wanting to change grips often, or if you need to have the option to have a grip offset. When I first grabbed the WINWING Viperstick, I immediately noticed the texture. The texture of the stick has a very fine dimple texture over the entire surface. Even though WINWING is metal, the dimples made me think otherwise when I first received it. In my opinion, it made it feel like plastic, compared to ones that are smooth, which is representative of a real-life Viper stick. The cold you feel on a smooth stick is an indicator that it is actually metal. With the surface having a dimpled texture, that mostly removes the cold feeling, giving it that plastic feel. Again, these are my opinions, and the texture does not affect usability. It is only personal preference. Now let's talk about the buttons on the stick. The TMS, DMS, and trim switches all are able to be depressed along with the four-way hat it provides. This is another feature that would be nice on the Warthog. This ability to be depressed can be used for growth, being that some aircraft actually have a depress on the top of the stick, meaning that this stick could totally be used for other aircraft, not only the F-16. I do not particularly like the mechanical keyboard clicking sound that the buttons have on the stick. It is something that I could deal with, but I do wish they were quieter. Again, they have nothing to do with usability, only personal quality indications. I am now going to cover the CMS, or the countermeasure switch. It is situated lower than on the Warthog. On the Warthog, it is raised up for easier access. During my first mission, I noticed this when I was unable to utilize the CMS right position without adjusting my hand and thumb on the stick. On the Warthog, the button is situated higher to allow for ease of use, just like in reality, to help when pressing CMS right. Here I will now showcase what it looks like, but it's hard to see if the button is actually activating. I would have to estimate once out of every 4 times the button actually activates. If I want to make sure that it activates, I would have to adjust my thumb or my hand to ensure I press it far enough to activate the button command. On the Warthog, being that it's raised, I have never had an issue with pressing CMS right. In other words, it is much easier to press CMS right to activate the button command. In regards to the nose wheel steering, on the WinWing it is a 4-way hat with a depress function. First time I used the stick in a mission on takeoff, you turn off your nose wheel steering when your airspeed gets to about 70 knots. I noticed I had to press the button a few times because I wasn't depressing straight in. I was pressing the other 4 directions. I totally understand that there's room for growth with this button, but for those who want the button to be nose wheel steering, then that may be problematic. One can get used to it over time, but coming from the Warthog, I don't particularly like that aspect and would like it just to be a button. But if this is your first stick, you might not have even noticed that without me mentioning it in this video. I enjoy the concept of the EX buttons on the side of the Viperstick, but I would not personally purchase this for extra buttons, solely because of my playing style. So if you're not aware, the EX has a stick shaker. So if you're wanting some vibration in your stick, you must have the EX. I must say it does give the stick a strange look, but it does increase usability when it comes to button assignment. These extra sets of buttons will be nice to have, especially if you fly other aircraft where those buttons could be mapped to something important, or you don't have a head tracker and must use one of the hats on the stick to look around. This is definitely a nice feature to have to allow you to use a hat to pan your camera while still keeping the original hats on the stick for important HOTAS controls. For me personally, it does get in the way of my thumb movement from the top of the face of the stick to the side where the CMS is. Of course it would take some time to get used to, but in the heat of the moment, I know I would accidentally press the bottom gray switch on the EX. When installing, be careful not to install on the cable and kink it. I did receive 2 extra cables, so if you purchase it, those cables should come with it, just in case any accidents happen. In the end, the EX buttons is definitely something nice to have. Hardware swapping is not really something I'm a fan of when it comes to changing cams and springs between aircraft, but it is nice to not be stuck with one particular feel. I plan on using only 1 cam and 1 spring for the aircraft I fly. Those are the Viper and the Eagle in BMS, and then the Viper only in DCS. I don't expect to change cams and springs based on what aircraft I fly. It is too much work, especially with the Orion 2 compared to the Aviation. The Orion 2 doesn't have the ability to adjust the tension of installed springs with screws without having to take off the cover. It is very helpful to change springs if you're wanting to adjust the tension, especially when switching between side stick tension and stiffer center stick tension required with an extension. It would be a total nightmare to always have to open up the base and change hardware every time you want to change aircraft. With the WinWing Orion 2, if you're wanting to change the hardware, the cover doesn't come off. Instead, the entire assembly comes out of the cover, making it a bit more unstable to work with, compared to the Aviation, where you simply remove the cover and everything you need is still attached to the base. The WinWing Orion 2 Joystick CAM Spring Dampening Extension Kit came with several cams and a few springs along with dampeners. I will be sticking with the NC1S cams and the stiffest springs. It mostly suits my needs and gives the stick some needed force that other cams and springs did not have. I am not interested in trying cams with soft centers, which is what the SC Arc and the SC1S have, with the SC meaning soft center. I have installed the dampeners, but they create a slight sticking around 70% deflection when returning the stick to center. It is very subtle, but noticeable, especially if you're used to something else. The dampeners work to reduce the wobble when you have full deflection and let go. That doesn't necessarily bother me, so I have removed the dampeners completely. In conclusion, the WinWing Orion 2 Viper EX with shaker and its accompanying springs and cams kit offer a compelling alternative to Thrustmaster's Aviation, with some aspects such as a dimpled and not smooth stick's texture may differ with people's preferences, but not affect usability. Versatility of the button layout and the potential for growth with depress functions on the TMS, DMS, and trim switches are significant advantages. But the ease of changing cams and adjusting springs without moving the cover is something to think about in regards to Thrustmaster. The EX buttons and shaker, despite some ergonomic considerations, provide valuable additional inputs, options, and tactile feedback. Ultimately, the choice between WinWing and Thrustmaster will depend on your priorities. Authenticity for the Viper versus versatility and affordability. Both brands offer quality products, and a mix of both can certainly get the job done.